following information is presented for discussion and educational purposes only and is not intended or provided as treatment information for any specific person or behavior. If you or a loved one is having behavioral difficulties, you are encouraged to seek professional consultation as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of Ask the Behavior Doctors. Again, we're here in beautiful, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, bringing you questions and answers from our parents, professionals, colleagues, things that people are wondering about, things that people want to know about behavioral interventions, behavioral science, just ABA in general. So we've got 2 questions today that we're going to focus on. First question is going to be about homework or homework time. School year is around here, obviously. We're in November, well into the fall semester. We're getting a lot of questions from parents about homework, how to do homework time with kids, how to make that process smoother. So we're going to have a question about homework time. Then the second question is a very common question I get, but a very general question, basically asking me about what is ABA? What is ABA include? What does ABA address? Why would my child need ABA? So those are the 2 things we're going to discuss, homework and ABA. So we'll get into our first question. And the question generally goes like this. Dr. Jacob, I'm trying to do homework with my child, but my kid throws a fit. They break down, they have a meltdown, they have a tantrum. It takes like 2 to 3 hours a night to do homework with my kid. What am I doing wrong? What should I do instead? So again, a very common concern, a very common issue among our audience, very common problem with a lot of our patients. And homework can start, I have some kids starting in kindergarten, 5, 6 years old, with kindergarten types of, with homework types of issues. So this can start at a very young age and be a concern for many years. So parents, number 1 thing to remember, the goal is your job is to help your child learn the process of doing homework, but not to actually do the homework for them. So your job is to help model some of those and help the child learn some of those component skills of doing homework, like being able to read directions, follow directions, being able to order things, sequence things, plan the assignment out. So your job is to help them learn some of those composite skills to do, or some of the component skills to do the composite skill of actually doing homework. Your job should not be to sit there and do the assignment for your child. That's not good for many reasons. Obviously, you don't want your child to be dependent upon you doing the homework. And also, too, that's not really going to help your child long term. If you're the one doing the homework, then when you're not there, the child's not going to be able to do that skill themselves. You're not doing your child any favors by, again, having to do that assignment. If your child needs your prompts, needs you there constantly to guide them throughout that process, well, then they're really not learning or picking it up themselves. So you really want to focus on teaching them the skill, transferring that skill to them, and then trying to fade back as quickly as possible. Remember, homework was intended, or is intended, should be intended as practice or repetition of what they're learning in school. Your child should have knowledge of what they're trying to do in the homework assignment. If they don't know anything about it, well, then you can certainly help them learn that, but that's something that the teacher needs to be aware of. You need to make sure your child actually knows how to do the skill that they're being assigned homework to do. And if they don't, well, then it's really a knowledge issue or a learning issue as opposed to a learning how to do homework issue. If your child's doing poorly on homework because they don't understand the material, then you as a parent, you've got to address that deficit with the teacher. You've got to plan for additional instruction, possibly additional tutoring. You've got to address some of those deficits, some of those holes, so that your child can understand the assignments that they're being assigned. Research has actually indicated that most parents are not that effective at doing homework with kids. Research has indicated that other people, tutors, teachers, instructors, are actually better at doing homework with kids, and this is for several reasons. Number 1, you have a really long learning history with your child. That learning history includes that child seeing you at your worst, yelling, screaming, frustrated. You've been inconsistent with your child before. You've given in before. You've broken in response to tantrums or outbursts before. The benefit that an instructor has over you as a parent is that that instructor doesn't have all that learning history. That instructor has probably spent most of that time with your child being an instructor. So your child has learned to respond in a accordingly way. They've learned to respond as a student in response to that instructor, but they're going to respond to you like a parent. So again, you putting yourself in that main role as homework helper, that can be dangerous and it can go wrong quickly, and it can also add a lot of stress to that dynamic and relationship with the child. So again, number one, that learning history is kind of something that's affecting your ability to be a great instructor. In relation to that learning history, you're more likely to get emotional with your child, and your child's more likely to get emotional with you. That emotion, that tension, getting frustrated, that's going to make the learning process a lot less efficient. You want the homework process to be as efficient as possible. You want homework to be done quickly. You don't want homework to last any longer than an hour a day. If your child's constantly pulling homework out to 2-3 hours, you're having fits, you're having to give them constant breaks, that's definitely a red flag that we probably need to talk to the teacher, and we need to figure out how to fill in some of those prior knowledge gaps. You may have conditioned yourself as what's called an SD. It stands for discriminative stimuli. It's basically you're a signal for demands. You become a signal for not so pleasant things coming up. You want to be careful conditioning yourself that way because you don't want to be that. So that's why I say letting someone else kind of take that role, take that spot, especially someone who doesn't have as much consistent exposure to your child. Remember, you need that dynamic between you and your kid to be as pleasant as possible. Sometimes putting that responsibility of instruction onto someone else can actually be quite helpful. I've had many parents who we've recommended tutors or recommended additional instructors be involved, and it made that dynamic between the parent and the child much more appropriate, much more peaceful. So that's definitely something you might want to consider. Last thing I've seen is, unfortunately, parents are much more likely to yell, threaten, scream, and use aversive strategies with children to get them to behave the way they want them to. Again, remember, it's your child. You're probably in the privacy of your own home. You're probably going to get frustrated and emotional if your kid starts having a tantrum or melting down. And what are you likely to do? Revert to some of those aversive strategies. Again, maybe threaten, maybe try to coerce, maybe threaten to punish your child. Again, that's probably something an instructor or a teacher wouldn't do with your child. So again, that's one of the other reasons why that instructor is probably going to have an advantage over you as a teacher trying to show your child how to do homework. So parents, I want to give you some quick and some basic behavioral recommendations for how to make the homework time or homework routine with your child as smooth as possible. Number one, I want you to plan homework time when your child is going to be most motivated to do homework, when their tolerance for distress or for task demands is going to be at its highest. If they just got home from school, obviously that may not be the best time. You might want to give a break right after they get back from school. Or if there's a part of the evening where you're going to be able to give them the most attention and they will have had a little bit of a break, and their demands or tolerance for demands is going to be pretty high, then that's probably when you want to plan homework time. I personally would never do any longer than an hour-long duration. The younger the child, the shorter time you should plan, and then give more frequent breaks. As your child gets a little bit older and builds that tolerance up, then you should definitely consider extending and shaping up that time. Be calm with your child. You set the energy tone. You set that dynamic. If you're calm and patient with your child, then they're more likely to maintain that demeanor and energy with you. So you really want to maintain a calm, low tone of voice. You want to try and be patient. You want to minimize your use of words. You want to offer encouragement as much as possible. And you want to model and set that tone of energy that you want your child to maintain during the process. Remember, especially with a young child with lots of homework, that can be very frustrating. They haven't yet learned how to deal with that frustration. So be patient with them, model the process, be the example that you want your child to follow. I highly consider finding a homework group, finding a study group, or hiring a tutor to do homework with your child. especially if you have a long history of hour-long battles with your child doing homework. Switching that responsibility to another person is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to transfer that responsibility to that other person that probably is not going to get the same response out of your child. But the second thing it's going to do is it's going to take all of those negative interactions, that negative experience, that traumatic kind of experience off of you and your child. Remember, if I was in your home measuring behavior, I would look at percentage of interactions that are pleasant and appropriate and interactions that are stressful or demanding. We want that number of interactions that are positive, that are pleasant, to be as high as possible, and we want that number of interactions that are negative or unpleasant to be as low as possible. So by transferring that homework responsibility onto a tutor or an instructor, you can help ensure that that dynamic with your child is going to be optimized as much as possible. Put your child in a quiet, distraction-free environment whenever available in your home. Make sure the only relevant stimuli that are in the environment are the homework and the instructor. You want to limit those distractions, try and put your kid in a quiet environment, and make the assignment the only thing that your child's attending to. Why? Because it's going to make that instructional process a lot more efficient. You want homework to be low maintenance, but you want it to be over quickly. You only want it to be a small part of your child's day. Make the most reinforcing part of your child's day come right after homework. So if your child does homework, and let's say they love to play video games, love to watch a special show, or let's say they love to watch or eat dinner with the family, plan that portion of the day to come right after homework. Why? Because by pairing the low preferred activity with a high preferred activity, you make that low preferred less aversive. You make it more likely to occur consistently. Again, that's the pre-med principle. So you really want to try and structure and arrange your child's day where the most preferred parts of the day come after their least preferred parts of the day. So if your child hates doing homework, try and put the most fun parts right after that homework time. Praise your child for being calm and praise them for completing assignments independently. Remember, that's the behavior you're trying to shape. You're trying to shape calm, independent completion of that homework. You're going to get the behaviors you consistently reinforce from your child. So if you pay attention to calm, independent, responsible types of behaviors, and you praise that, and you make that noticeable, and you make that important, your child's more likely to give that to you consistently. Considering offering extra access to special reinforcers if your child does their homework quickly and accurately. Remember, that's what fluency is. Fluency is a combination of speed and accuracy. We want to reward your child beyond their typical rewards for doing the homework more accurately and doing it more quickly. So you can give that incentive to your child and say, hey, look, you typically get this kind of stuff done in about 30 minutes, but if you can get this math worksheet done in 20 minutes and you can get at least 80% of these problems correct, then you'll get an extra 30 minutes of TV time right after. Remember, sweeten the pot. If your child's going to give you exceptional behavior, consider giving them an exceptional reinforcer and reward. If your child's having significant difficulties, break the assignment down into small pieces. Make those pieces manageable. Make those pieces step by step. Remember, make it easy for your child to comprehend and understand what they have to do. If you break it down into smaller steps, it seems less overwhelming. It should make the experience less stressful for your child. Help them break that down into components. Tell them that once you're done with part 1, you can take a 5-minute break. Once you're done with part 2, I'll give you a 5-minute break. And then once you're done with part 3, I'll give you a 10-minute break. Breaking that down into manageable pieces will make it more doable for your child. Allow your child's words and their functional requests to work better than their behaviors. So when your child starts to show frustration or starts to get really upset, make it clear that all they have to do is ask for your help or ask for a break. If their words work really well, they won't need their behaviors in that situation. Make it clear that if they just use their words and say, hey, Mom, I need help. Mom, I need a break. Mom, I'm really tired of doing this. Can I please do something else for a little bit? If their words work really well, like I said, they won't need their behaviors as much. Start small and build your child's tolerance, especially if they're an early learner. Only make them do an assignment for 10 to 15 minutes, give them a break. shape that up to about an hour eventually. I think most kids, especially 10 and under, shouldn't be doing durations of homework probably beyond an hour. If your child can do it and they're skilled at doing it, great. Certainly don't stop them. But what's normal and typical from a professional perspective that I see is that children doing homework sustained for beyond an hour is pretty difficult for children under the age of 10. Work your way up, obviously, as your child builds that tolerance. Fade out your involvement, but build up that tolerance. So obviously set the bar at maybe 20 minutes at first, then say, okay, when you do 30 minutes of homework, you'll get a break. When you do 40 minutes of homework, like I said, shape that up to that 60-minute mark as quickly as possible. Last recommendation is have a plan for when your child becomes super frustrated or super upset. Kind of create like a mini crisis plan. Like, okay, when you get really upset, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to this place and do these kind of things. So let's say there's a special beanbag chair in the room. They can say, okay, let's go sit on your chair. Let's take some deep breaths and let's just be quiet for 2 minutes. When you can do that, mom will talk to you. I'll help you. We'll calm down and then we'll go back to the assignment. Remember, parents, when your child starts to melt down or they start to have a tantrum, that is not the right time to get compliance out of your child. So a lot of parents will try and redirect their child back onto the assignment immediately when the child is kind of melting down. You want to get a calm, de-escalated response before you start prompting the child back to the assignment. Again, when your child's starting to lose it, they've got to regain it first before you can expect that compliance. All right, so on to our second and final question for today. It's a very common question that I get. The question basically goes like this: Dr. Jacob, what exactly is ABA? I've heard of ABA and I've heard it's kind of like a treatment for children with special needs, but my child is a typical child and just has kind of behavioral issues, so I really don't know how ABA could be useful for us. Can you tell me, Dr. Jacob, what ABA could do for my typical child who's high cognitive functioning but just kind of has behavioral issues? So my answer to this question is pretty straightforward. Number one, the most confusing thing parents hear is that ABA is a treatment technique. ABA is not a treatment technique. ABA is an entire field of science. ABA is a natural science like physics, chemistry, or biology. It's not a social science like psychology or sociology. So remember, it being an entire field of science is an important concept because as a field of science, we have hundreds of techniques, hundreds of principles within our science that guide how we practice the science of ABA. ABA is an analytical, data-driven process that increases behavioral deficits and decreases behavioral excesses. The reason this is important is it is a data-driven process. Doing ABA is a very objective analytical process that has not a good or bad kind of connotation to it, but an effective or ineffective. It's very easy to tell whether adaptive behaviors are increasing and maladaptive behaviors are decreasing. That's very objective, that's very fact-based. You can look at a graph, you can look at quantitative data and tell whether things are increasing or decreasing. So you want to make sure that both are occurring at the same time. Just as a review, just thinking here too, ABA obviously stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. So I want to make that very obvious to parents. So Applied Behavior Analysis, it's that behavior analytic process. So remember, good ABA is objectively increasing adaptive behaviors and decreasing maladaptive behaviors at the same time. Both need to occur. It's really easy to make one or other happen. For example, I've gone into many classrooms where children will have behavioral issues. We'll design a behavior plan. I'll come back and the teacher will say, oh my gosh, Johnny's not aggressing anymore. Johnny doesn't have that problem behavior where he gets out of his chair all the time. However, I'll go to the class and I'll see Johnny, and what do you know? Johnny's sitting on a computer playing games for 80% of the day. When I was in there before, he was playing games 30% of the day. So the teachers basically achieved a generic result. They got him to decrease the behavior, but they took away all the task demands. That's really not impressive. What would have been impressive is that they could have increased his task demand time to, let's say, 3 hours of direct instruction a day, while also increasing his compliance or increasing his in-seat behavior. So remember, good behavior or good behavior analysis is the analytical, data-driven process of increasing adaptive behaviors while also decreasing maladaptive behaviors. So a point to make clear too is we're not actually changing behaviors, we're changing the environment. Remember, the environment is everything but the moving parts of the organism. It's everything around us, both internal and external, that's contributing to that behavior. So the environment is pretty much everything around an organism. We're optimizing that environment to occasion great behaviors. Obviously, the concept of this is that operant behaviors, operational behaviors, the things we do, that's mostly what we study. Those are maintained by reinforcement. Those are reinforcement maintained. Everything we do has to be reinforced. The law of operant behavior states that behavior cannot and will not sustain unless it is reinforced. So reinforcement is what maintains everything we do. Everything we do is either positively reinforced, we get something, some kind of introduction of a stimulus, or something is removed. A stimulus we don't like is removed, and we get to avoid things we don't like. So knowing that is really critical, in that if you effectively use reinforcement, you optimally design the environment to support and sustain great behaviors, you won't even have room for naughty behaviors. You won't have room for aberrant behaviors in the environment. So the reason I bring all of this together is that these lead to a basic truth. Again, going back to that law of operant behavior cannot and will not sustain unless it is reinforced. It leads us to two truths: that if you withdraw all reinforcement in the environment, or you withhold all reinforcement in response to a behavior, that behavior will stop. It will cease to exist. Again, if it's not reinforced and it's an operant behavior, it cannot persist. The second truth, though, is that if behavior is persisting and sustaining in the environment, it is being reinforced. I go into many homes and parents tell me, Jacob, I promise you, I've looked at it every way. I'm not doing anything in response to this behavior. He just does it. But again, that doesn't align with the basic principle of our science. If that behavior is persisting and if it's operant, it is being reinforced. So the reason I teach parents this is so that they know these basics and they know that the behavior they're getting is being reinforced and the behavior they're not getting is not being reinforced. Remember, you get the behaviors that you consistently reinforce. So I want to teach parents and enable parents and all professionals that work with children. I want to teach you to effectively use reinforcement to design optimal environments that sustain great behavior. These truths of behavior are just as universal as gravity, just as universal as mitosis, just as universal as the Krebs cycle. They are always present. They are always happening. You can't turn them off. They're omnipresent. Some parents have told me, hey, Jake, the behavioral stuff doesn't really apply to my child. Well, that's a really silly statement. That's like saying gravity doesn't apply to you, or that, mitosis doesn't apply to you. It's just not the case. It's always at play. It's always present. It's always there. You can't turn it off. You are constantly interacting with your environment, and your environment is interacting with you. That's what behavior is. Behavior is that exchange between an environment and behavior. It's a constant process of behaviors shaping the environment and the environment shaping behaviors. ABA is the most evidence-based, most effective way of increasing behavioral deficits and decreasing behavioral excesses. There is no other science of behavior that does these two things nearly as effectively as ABA. You have other types of sciences like psychiatry or things like that that can affect the internal environment of the organism by obviously changing the brain's chemistry. There's certainly, obviously the brain has a major contribution to behavior and can make significant contributions with that. However, as far as behavioral repertoires, behavioral excesses, behavioral deficits, there are no pills to teach children skills, and there are no pills to turn off certain types of behavioral repertoires. This is where ABA comes in. ABA shapes up those behavioral skills, and it designs or helps design the environment to optimally not support aberrant behaviors anymore. Again, we use reinforcement to design the optimal environment to shape and sustain great behaviors. So parents, the final message of this that I want to send to you is that you are always doing ABA, whether you know it or not. If you are issuing prompts or issuing stimuli or saying things and you are trying to get a response out of a behavior, then you are doing ABA. Again, you're doing it probably on accident, but we want to teach you how to do it on purpose. So the principles of ABA are always occurring, they're always present, they're always at play, and we want to help our audience use the science of ABA to do things and to get great behaviors on purpose consistently. We don't want you to do it on accident anymore. So that's kind of my best explanation of why ABA is meant for everyone. ABA, again, is always at play, and ABA should be used in a conscious, preventative, helpful way to get the behaviors you consistently want from the people in your environment. There is no better science to do that than ABA. So that brings us to an end today, ladies and gentlemen. Wanted to answer a couple of your questions. Obviously, the best way to get us questions is through our email address, info@scottsdalepbs.com. Again, visit our website at www.scottsdalepbs.com. We're going to start putting a bunch of articles, a bunch of information. We're going to post these videos to that website. And again, search for us on YouTube using the hashtag AskTheBehaviorDoctors. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure. We look forward to getting your questions and answering more of those next time. Take care.